Okay, today we're going to be going through a court case that I saw actually posted on LinkedIn. This is courtesy of Jurate, Gulbinas. She's an attorney CPA. And the court case today, and I'm going to put it up on the screen. The court case today we're going to be discussing is the following. Okay, so we have here Jack Donald Supinger, the petitioner versus the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue. It's just interesting to note that the Internal Revenue Service is always at its helm the commissioner, which is the party. Anyways, I'm just going to be going through this, my live reaction. I did not read this yet. I read a small summary based on the LinkedIn post, which I'll put below in the show notes. But otherwise, we have a case over here where the petitioner, which is person basically the person in trouble, he filed a $0 return, which basically said he made $0 of income, and he claimed everything he withheld as a refund, and that is a problem. Let's just go through it. It is a 16-page court case, but let's go through and see what we can learn. What I love about court cases, and as I tell people all the time, is that there's no way you could learn all parts of the Internal Revenue Code. But going through a court case helps you learn more parts of the Internal Revenue Code, maybe parts that you haven't read yet. Also helps you find parts that are important. Usually they're quoted, and then we can look them up as well, and then use that as an opportunity to really solidify our knowledge of the Internal Revenue Code and applicable portions. So today we're going to start over here. Also, I love court cases because you get to learn all the gossip in what really happened in a case, at least what we're from the perspective of what we're reading. Okay, so the judge said the following: the respondent issued petitioner a notice of deficiency. Okay, so the IRS sends this guy a notice of deficiency. Supinger. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but basically, the IRS sends him a notice of deficiency, in which he determined a deficiency of $16,016 plus a section 662A1 accuracy-related penalty of $3,203 with respect to the petitioner's 2018 tax year. Okay, so we're talking about he filed his 2018 tax return, and the IRS was like, hey, you still owe $16,016 of taxes plus 6662A. Sorry, the one is actually referring to a note down here, but plus accuracy-related penalties. Okay, fine. Sounds pretty simple. What a good taxpayer would do is just pay it and move on. But that is not what the petitioner did. In a first amendment to answer, respondent also asserted a section 6651A1, addition to tax for failure to file a timely return, as an alternative to the section 662A accuracy-related penalty. So what does this mean? The First Amendment to answer. Okay, so the respondent. Okay, so the IRS also said that there was a 6651A1 addition to tax for failure to file a timely return. So it sounds like the IRS was like, hey, we could also do this penalty instead. Now, what's interesting is from what I read before is what's his name? Supinger did file a tax return. So what exactly was it that the IRS thought that he didn't? Let's just real quick look up 6651A1, because that's what I'm talking about. When we take the opportunity to use something in context, it ends up being a lot more understandable, and also a lot more meaningful in how we're going to remember it. So 6651, failure to file tax return or to pay tax. So pretty straightforward. 6651A1 is in addition to the tax, in case of failure to file any return required under the authority, yada, yada, yada. Basically, there's going to be again, it's talking about in addition to the tax, meaning you're going to get a fee, not a fee, you're going to get taxed penalty, regardless, separate from your taxes that you pay. Okay, so unless it's shown, the law says, unless it's shown that such failure is due to reasonable cause and not due to willful neglect, there shall be, so meaning when you do willful neglect, there shall be added to the amount required to be shown on the tax return 5% of the amount of such tax if the failure is for not more than 1 month, and in addition 5% for each additional month. Wow, 5% every single month or fraction thereof during which failure continues, not exceeding 25% in the aggregate. So basically, pay your taxes. Pay your taxes quickly because, and for sure, file a return because just not filing a return asserts a whole new level of penalties. So in this case, either the IRS was going to say, hey, you have to pay these accuracy-related penalty or just failure to file penalty. In this opinion, we decide whether petitioner, 1, failed to report wage income that he received during the year in issue, and 2, is liable for the section 6662A and B2 accuracy-related penalty for an underpayment due to a substantial understatement of income tax, or in the alternative, right, like we said, the section 6651A1, addition to tax for failure to file a timely return. So we're going to figure out is number 1, did he file a return? And then what penalties are going to be applicable. We also decide whether to grant respondents motion to impose sanctions as to petitioner motion to impose sanctions, in which respondent moves this court to impose a section 6673 penalty against petitioner for instituting this proceeding, primarily for delay, and because petitioner's position is frivolous and groundless. Okay, big thing, don't do frivolous things. In this case, we're talking about 6673. So, okay, I'm looking up 6673 here. So 6673 is sanctions and costs awarded by courts. So sounds like we're going to be discussing is, will he get a 6673 penalty? And just quickly reading through 6673, I highly recommend you take a look. Again, use this as an opportunity to learn more sections of the Internal Revenue Code. But basically is, hey, I'm going to go ahead, somebody not wanting to follow the rules, I'm going to go ahead and file I'm going to file a frivolous return and basically just cause issues, and then it'll just push off when I have to pay it, right? So the IRS, so the Internal Revenue Code, the law states that if you're going to do that, then you are going to be in the hot seat for additional penalties because we don't want people doing that. Okay, findings of fact. Now we're going to go through what actually happened in order. So petitioner resided in South Carolina, a state I've never been to yet, when he timely filed his petition. No stipulation of facts was filed in this case. However, respondents' exhibits 5R through 10R and petitioner's exhibits 11P were received into evidence at trial. Okay, that's just some administrative stuff. Trial in this case was held July 19th, 2023. Wow, that was somewhat a long time ago, because this opinion only came out September 4th, which as of today's recording was about 4 or 5 days ago. During this year in issue, remember we're talking about 2018, petitioner was employed by Frontier Communications Corporation or its related entity, Frontier California Inc., okay, just known as Frontier, as a customer service technician. That was his job. Frontier issued petitioner an amended W-2 reporting wages of $102,533. No federal income tax withheld, Social Security tax withheld of $6,357, and Medicare tax withheld of $1,487 for the year in issue. So major red flag right away. Why was there no withholding? Great question. Just want to make sure we don't miss anything. At the beginning of every court case, by the way, it'll have this quick note that says, hey, when we're referring to the law, we're referring to U.S. Code 26, which is the Internal Revenue Code. Okay. Frontier reported petitioner's wages to respondent, which means, that just in English means Frontier filed their W-2 because that's what you do. Petitioner timely filed Form 1040 for the year in issue. Okay, that's good. He did not report any money received from any source and reflected 0 entries for income and on all other lines except for $7,844 that he reported as federal income tax withheld. Okay, so that's that's interesting. So he files his 1040 and says, oh, I didn't receive any income. Now, how he put $7,844 as withheld, I'm not sure. I guess he just put that on the face of the 1040 on page 2 where it says, federal income tax withheld, because there was obviously nothing backing that up. Petitioner claimed a refund of the $7,844. Now, you may be wondering, what's $7,844? Well, $6,357 plus $1,487 is $7,844. So he's claiming a refund, not even for income tax. He's claiming a refund for Social Security and Medicare tax, which is so wild. People, this is my opinion, people are wild sometimes. Like, just Go off, King, as they say. Respondent examined petitioner's return and determined the petitioner had underreported income of $102,533 for the year in issue, resulting in a deficiency of $16,016, right? Which is callback. That's what we talked about at the beginning. And the section 6662 and B2 accuracy related penalty for substantial understatement of income tax of $3,203. Okay, and then on March 2nd, 2022, respondent issued the notice to petitioner. Let's just take a look at these notes real quick. Because the parties were unable to reach a stipulation of facts in violation of Rule 91A, respondent submitted certified and redacted copies of the respondent's transcript, petitioner's 2018 Form 1040. Okay, what's interesting about tax court, and this is something I've been learning, is that there's a bunch of rules, and you can actually read these rules, but all these rules reference basically the procedures and how the tax court goes ahead and does things, and you got to follow that. Okay, another note, the Form W-2 was issued to petitioner by Frontier, California, but other documents related to petitioner's employment reference Frontier Communications Corporation. Okay, it's basically just addressing what's the discrepancy between the two entities. When asked about these entities, petitioner gave only evasive answers. We're going to check out note 10 later. As respondent received documents identifying both entities from Frontier, and as petitioner had not indicated otherwise, we conclude that Frontier California Inc. and Frontier Communications Corp. are related entities. Further, we conclude the specific relationship between these entities is not relevant for the purposes of deciding this case. Okay, cool. Happens to be they're related, nothing to do with the case. Okay, on June 6th, 2022, which is exactly 3 months, right? No, excuse me. March, April, May, June. So yeah, 3 months after the original notice of deficiency, the petitioner filed the petition. So he was directly on the 90-day mark, which I believe with a notice, again, this is part of the learning process. I believe a notice like that, you have 90 days to respond. Well, maybe we'll talk about it here. On July 18th, 2022, respondent filed an answer. Okay, so the IRS sent back a letter on July 18th. Not too bad for the IRS, only about 6 weeks to respond. On May 11th, 2023, okay, now we're jumping almost a year. Respondent lodged the First Amendment to answer concurrently with a motion for leave to file First Amendment to answer, asserting in addition to tax under Section 6651A1 for failure to timely file, as an alternative to Section 6662A accuracy-related penalty that respondent had determined in the notice. Okay, we're getting a little technical here. Let's keep on reading, and we'll go back and figure out what's going on. Respondent also requested the court to sanction petitioner under Section 6673 for instituting this proceeding, primarily for delay and because petitioner's position is frivolous or groundless. The court granted respondent's motion for leave to file a First Amendment to answer and filed respondent's First Amendment to answer. I'm not exactly sure what a First Amendment to answer is, but I think I get the idea of what's happening, which is basically it went back and forth, and then the court said, again, the court granted the respondent's motion, so the court agreed with the IRS to have these penalties. Okay, let's keep on reading because it's not really important. During the course of this case, petitioner asserted a wide variety of arguments that have been routinely discredited as frivolous in this court and others, such as 1, there is no evidence that petitioner was involved in taxable activity during the year in question. 2, respondent has failed to cite which statute makes petitioner subject to and liable for tax due and owing to the United States Treasury. 3, petitioner completed a self-assessment for the year in question in compliance with 26 CFR 1.861-8, finding that he had insufficient taxable income to create a tax liability. One was curious to look up that. These are all frivolous arguments that have really simple answers, or they're just totally missing the point. The Internal Revenue Service has failed to provide evidence that the petitioner derived income while engaged in a revenue taxable activity, as shown by certified copies of contracts in interstate commerce. Okay, whatever interstate commerce is. And there is a footnote there. Let's take a look. Okay, petitioner raised arguments 1 through 4 in the petition filed June 6, 2022. Okay, fine. Now, some more. Again, this guy spent so much time. I'm curious if he just like put it into chat GPT. Like who even has time to come up with all these arguments? 5, there is no contract between petitioner and respondent to pay a tax. It's called you're subject to the laws of the United States, but whatever. I'm not going to give my commentary. I will let the court speak to that. 6, the income tax is an excise tax. Okay, sure. 7, there is no law requiring the average American to file and pay income taxes. I guess he's never read the first and the 14th Amendment? I'm pretty sure. Okay, fact check me here. Let's see. 14th Amendment. No, not the 14th Amendment. So wait, which one? Was it the 16th Amendment? Amendment allowing taxes. Yes, the 16th Amendment. Excuse me. Okay, the 16th Amendment totally allowed people to get taxed, but we'll talk about that later. 8, the Internal Revenue Service is not an agency of government in accordance with 28 U.S. Code 3002-15A, 28 U.S. Code 3002-15B, and also 15C. Sure, okay, pretty sure they are, but whatever. Like I said, go off, King. 9, petitioner has no verifiable evidence that he is a taxpayer as defined by IRC 7701A14. What is IRC 7701? Let's take a look at that. Okay, 7701 definitions. Okay, so it's a definitions A14. A and then 14. Taxpayer. The term taxpayer means any person subject to any internal revenue tax. Again, not sure how he could possibly claim that. Okay, and he believes that no such evidence exists. And 10, finally, petitioner is not a U.S. citizen and no evidence exists to the contrary. Oh, okay, so that's interesting. Now let's just look at the footnote there. Petitioner raised this argument. Okay, it's just administrative. In support of this argument, petitioner attached a letter that he received from the Department of Homeland Security in response to his FOIA request regarding whether DHS has any documents relating to his status as a U.S. citizen. And then DHS replied that no records were responsive to your request were located. Is he a citizen or is he not? I don't really know what that means. Either way, it doesn't really matter. This is not the first time that the petitioner has made frivolous arguments in the court. So this guy is pretty has done this before. Pursuant to Rule 201 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, we take judicial notice of the tax court records of the petitioner's 2 other cases. Okay, so there's two other cases, 2017 and also 2019 tax year. Different times, petitioner filed a petition related to deficiency for the 2017 tax year. I'm not like, why? Just why? In that deficiency proceeding, petitioner had filed a 0 return despite having received 2 forms W-2, one from Frontier and one from J.R. Putman, Inc., as well as forms 1099 miscellaneous from FMS Investment Corp. Reporting non-employee compensation back in the good old days when miscellaneous reported non-employee compensation. On the return for 2017 tax year, petitioner had claimed a refund for $5,993. Same idea, which appears to be the total withholding amount listed on the forms W-2 for all the Social Security tax, federal income tax. I guess he got smart, at least in 2018. He filled out the W-4 to be exempt. Whoever the HR rep was that was like, yeah, sure, we'll make you exempt, maybe also be looked into because, come on, you can't do that. He also filed 2 forms 4852 substitute for form W-2, which listed the same amounts of tax withholdings as his form W-2, but listed the wages as 0. Sure, just minus out the income. He had attached a letter to his 2017 return asserting that forms 4852 corrected erroneous information. Oh, I didn't really work. Sorry, IRS. So just X that out. Reported on forms W-2 submitted to the IRS, and that he had not received payments connected with taxable activities as described in sections 3121 and 3401. What's 3121? Okay, again, great opportunity to learn some new sections of the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, so 3121 is another definitions. Usually these definitions, you have to really understand where they are inside the code to fully understand the context, but we're not going to go too much into that. Okay, so taxable activities. Yeah, so, so 3121 just talks about a bunch of different definitions, and I guess taxable activities is in there. What's 3401? Let's see if I'm up to it. Okay, 3401 is also more definitions, similar idea. So I'm sure they all just relate to the section that they're near. Okay, he had also asserted that the payments did not result from any federally taxable activity whatsoever and do not constitute taxable income under relevant income tax law. Additionally, in an attachment to the petitioner raised several other common frivolous arguments, including that the income tax is an excise tax and that the forms W-2 were hearsay. Sure, okay. During the case, the court repeatedly warned Mr. Supinger that a tax court petitioner that makes frivolous contentions, such as that the income tax is unconstitutional, hashtag see the 16th Amendment, or that wages are not income, could be liable for a penalty under Section 6673. Mr. Supinger did not heed the court's repeated warnings. Oh, I would have wanted to be in the room there to see that. He testified that he had no taxable income for 2017 and refused to answer any questions regarding the income of his relationship with Frontier or Putnam. He also professed not to understand the meaning of the word employed or received. That is a way to go about things. I don't really understand what that means. Sorry, I can't help you. And claimed that he did not remember whether he had worked for Putnam in 2017 or whether money was deposited into his bank account. Yeah, just zero recollection. The court apparently he can make all these arguments. He remembers all these like fancy frivolous arguments, but he can't remember whether he worked for someone. The court issued a bench opinion sustaining a deficiency of $9,008, a similar idea, and also an accuracy-related penalty, 1801. Okay, that was a separate court case. So this guy is a serial frivolous filer, I guess you can say. Additionally, on March 13th, 2023, Petitioner filed a petition related to a notice of deficiency for the 2019 tax year, determining that he had failed to report Form W-2 wages. In his petition challenging the 2019 notice, he stated that he was not involved in any revenue taxable activity. A similar idea. In support of that position, Petitioner filed a motion for summary judgment and an affidavit, nothing like a good old affidavit to just make things true, asserting that 1, he is not a U.S. citizen, he is not a U.S. resident. Don't see me, I'm not here. And 3, no equitable contract exists between the parties in which the petitioner is liable to respondent for a debt. Just as in this case, the petitioner submitted a letter that he had solicited from DHS regarding his citizenship status. On February 12th, 2024, the court issued an order denying the motion for summary judgment. The order rejected several arguments, including petitioner's citizenship argument relying on the DHS letter as frivolous. The court again warned petitioner that persisting in such contentions would increase the likelihood that you will be sanctioned under Section 6673A. Okay, now we're up to March 20th, 2024, approximately 2 weeks before the trial. The court issued an order, again warning petitioner that it would take judicial notice of the tax court record. In the petitioner's other 2 cases, in response, on April 2nd, right after April Fool's Day, petitioner filed a motion to dismiss the the petition in the other court case. On April 5th, 2024, the court entered an order and decision granting petitioner's motion to dismiss the case with prejudice. The facts in the case are similar to those in the petitioner's previous case. Petitioner's employer issued Form W-2. I'm so curious what this guy actually did. Like, how is he an employee that made this amount of money? Because he was good at something. Okay, reporting wages for the year at issue. Petitioner submitted Form 1040, reporting zero income. Okay, let's just skip ahead a little bit. At trial, in this case, we remind the petitioner that the court had previously found these arguments frivolous. So, don't do this. We further warned petitioner that Section 6673 of the IRC authorizes me, the court, IRS, to impose, the court, a significant penalty if I, the judge, conclude that you're repeating frivolous arguments when they were already that were already rejected by the court in a previous case. In response, petitioner stated, "So right now, I'm only relying on the Department of Homeland Security document. I'm not making any of those previous arguments." I gotta say, this guy has so much chutzpah. None of that. So that's the only thing I have to offer for the entire case right now. Relying on the DHS letter, he stated that he did not believe that he was a U.S. citizen, and therefore, the IRS did not have any standing to make any claims against him. Thus, petitioner abandoned the frivolous argument that he had raised in this case and pressed forward only his citizenship argument. In closing, he stated, "I guess I'll add that I haven't made any of the previous arguments that were found frivolous today, so we can all take note of that." Sure. Okay. On cross-examination, respondent, which is the IRS, asked petitioner basic questions such as where he was employed during the year in issue. Remember, he doesn't know what employed means. Whether he received money from Frontier, the amount he reported as withholding. Whether in his deficiency proceedings for the 2017 tax year, he had also had Form W-2 income from Frontier, and how he earned a living. Right. How does he have money? Great question. Petitioner gave, my question is, what did he tell, when he had to go to court, what did he tell his employer? Sorry, I have to go to court for not reporting the income that you give me. Petitioner gave non-responsive and evasive answers to all the respondents' questions, or stated that he did not understand the words that the respondents' counsel used in formulating her questions. So here's let's do a little back and forth. Mr. Supinger, during the years 2018, were you employed by Frontier California Inc. or Frontier Communications, correct? I do not recall. You received $1,002 $102,533 from Frontier, California, for in the year 2018. Correct? I do not recall. And it just goes on. He just does not recall. Okay, so now that we've talked about what happened, the opinion of the court is going to discuss like the background of the law. And this I find the most interesting, because now here is where we get not only the sources from the law, but also sources from other important court cases. Whoever the judge and the judge's lawyers that puts this all together, I find it really interesting. So curious how they know which court case is the latest court case to prove something. But it's also interesting to see, we're about to see that we bring in court cases from many, many years ago, even almost 100 years ago. Okay, so burden of proof. In general, the commissioner's, IRS's, determination in a notice of deficiency is presumed correct, okay? And the taxpayer has the burden of proving otherwise. So if anyone asks, why should you file a tax return? Because the law states that you have to prove otherwise. Here's the rest of that whole discussion back and forth. Let's see. Do you know what Frontier California or Frontier Communications is? Technically, no. It's an interesting response. What do you mean when you say technically no? No, I don't know. I don't own that company. If it is a company, so I have no knowledge of that question. Mr. Supinger, how do you make money? Make it? I don't make it. How do you earn a living? I don't know. I don't understand the words you're using, to be honest. This guy is, like I said, lots of chutzpah. Okay, just taking a look at that footnote real quick. So again, it's all about the taxpayer is the one who has to prove otherwise. So that's why we file a tax return, because we're the ones who have to be on the offensive or defensive. Either way, we have the burden of proof. In the footnote, it says under section 7491A, the burden of proof may shift to the commissioner as to certain factual issues relevant to the taxpayer's tax liability if the taxpayer meets certain conditions. See that court case there. Petitioner does not contend that the burden of proof should shift to the respondent under section 7491A, nor has he established that the requirements for shifting the burden of proof have been met. Accordingly, the burden of proof remained on petitioner. So, okay, interesting. There are cases where we can shift the burden of proof over to the IRS, and we're saying over here that did not happen. In unreported income cases, in unreported income cases, the commissioner must either establish a minimal evidentiary showing connecting the taxpayer with the alleged income-producing activity, or demonstrate the taxpayer actually received unreported income. Okay, so we're establishing a rule that when you have unreported income, the commissioner has to come up with some evidence showing that there was an income-producing activity, or just show the income. See that court case over there. And again, if you're only listening to this on audio, I'm displaying on my screen, in the video, the actual words of the court case, and I highly recommend you take a look, because this is really interesting. And this is a great opportunity to go back and look at other court cases that establish these rules, and help us understand. And again, these are old court cases back in 1992 or 1933 even. But it's very worthwhile to go back to those original court cases to understand and be able to critically think through the intentions of the court and their interpretation of the law and how it applies to us even today. Only after the commissioner makes the required threshold showing that the burden shifts to the taxpayer to prove a preponderance of the evidence that the IRS's determination is arbitrary or erroneous. That sentence was really tricky. Basically, only after the IRS meets a certain threshold does it shift back. Wait, what? Only after the commissioner makes the required threshold showing does the burden shift to the taxpayer. Basically, IRS still has to do stuff to get it back to the taxpayer in certain cases. I hope I'm reading this right. Highly recommend you take a look as well. And put down in the comments, hey, if I got something wrong, please teach me. This is 100% a learning opportunity for all of us out there. Okay, the commissioner may not rely solely on the third-party report of income. Interesting. Such as Form W-2, if the taxpayer raises a reasonable dispute concerning the accuracy of the report. Okay, if someone goes ahead and files a bunch of W-2s against you, and you have a reasonable dispute, like, it's okay. But I don't think that's the case over here. Respondent introduced, so the IRS introduced into evidence Form W-2, Your Honor, Form W-2 from Frontier, showing that the petitioner received wages of $102,533 for the year in issue. Petitioner does not allege that he did not receive payments from Frontier during the year in issue, or that he received payments in a lower amount. Why couldn't they just subpoena his bank account records? Anyways, because Petitioner has not raised a reasonable dispute concerning the accuracy of Form W-2, one more time. Because Petitioner has not raised a reasonable dispute concerning the accuracy of Form W-2, Section 6201D does not apply. Interesting. What's Section 6201D? Let's take a look. Section 6201. So Section 6201 is assessment authority and discusses the authorization required to make inquiries, determinations, assessments of all taxes. Okay, so basically saying the petitioner, which is Mr. Supinger, didn't raise any reasonable dispute. Sorry, buddy. In that case, we hold that the Form W-2 established the requisite evidentiary foundation and that the presumption of correctness attaches to respondent's income adjustment. Okay, there you go. Petitioner bears the burden of proving that the deficiency determination for the year in issue is incorrect. So now it's on Mr. Supinger. Okay, let's fly through this. Reporting of income. Section 61A1 defines gross income. Okay, here we go. This is what I'm talking about. It always goes back to the basics. Okay, for every taxpayer, tax professional, enrolled agent, CPA, you got to know these things and you got to constantly review it. And that's why court cases are fantastic, because this is a great time to review what is income. Well, look at Section 61A1. Section 61A1 defines gross income as all income from whatever source derived, including compensation for services. Wages and salaries are compensation for services that are includable in gross income. Check out the Treasury regulation over there. So, by the way, this is why we always have to ask first. We have to find out what money was received and for what reason, and only then can we start figuring out how to establish why it might not be taxable income. But remember, all income, those are the words, all income from whatever source derived, okay? That is gross income. I mean, actually, it's worthwhile to spend a second to go over to Section 61, because this is so integral and pivotal to understanding how taxes work. So 61A1, and again, I highly recommend. General gross income defined. General definition, except as otherwise provided in the subtitle. Gross income means all income from whatever source derived, including, but not limited to, the following items: compensation for services, including fees, commissions, fringe benefits, and similar items. And then it goes through a whole list. Gross income derived from business. By the way, the literal definition says gross income derived from business. We think, oh, it's only net income. No. The taxable income is gross income. Only because Section 162 exists, right? We're in Section 61 now. Only because Section 162 exists do we have ordinary and necessary business expenses that we can take as a deduction. Otherwise, gross income derived from business is taxable, okay? Gains derived from dealing in property, interest, rents, royalties, dividends, annuities, income from life insurance and endowment contracts, pensions. Again, everything is included. And by the way, remember what it said. It means all of these included but not limited to. Remember, this is the written law, okay? Doesn't get more credible than that. So that's why I love looking at court cases. You got to start from the beginning, from the basics. Petitioner did not advance any non-frivolous argument or offer any credible evidence showing that the wages he received were not gross income. After the court warned Petitioner in its bench opinion for his 2017 tax year that his arguments were frivolous and groundless, he abandoned them in this case. However, he forged ahead with a frivolous argument not raised in his deficiency proceeding for the 2017 tax year, but raised and rejected by the court in his deficiency proceeding for the 2019 tax year. That the wages listed on the W-2 are not taxable to him because he is not a U.S. citizen, and no evidence exists to the contrary. As again, in court cases, you'll very often find like the same thing sort of repeated again, which is why looking at summaries is helpful, but it doesn't give the same level of understanding and real like learning that you go through when you go through each step of how you got to that conclusion of what's in a summary. As with other abandoned arguments, this argument is a type that we've repeatedly rejected as frivolous. Okay, we will not refute petitioner's frivolous arguments with somber reasoning and copious citations of precedent, because to do so might suggest that he has some colorable merit. I have to say, sometimes I want to read that sentence again. It's just such well written, such great writing. We will not refute petitioner's frivolous argument with somber reasoning and copious citation of precedent, because to do so might suggest that it has some colorable merit. Whew. Okay. We hold that the petitioner received wages of $102,533 during the year in issue, which he failed to include in his gross income for that year. Now, what I would love to ask an attorney is, well, what if like the court went ahead and like took advantage of this and said like everything I let's say I'm in court, hopefully not. I haven't been to court, so just letting you know, full disclosure. But let's say I am, or someone's in court and they're making valid arguments, and then the court says, "Oh, we're not going to bother reasoning with that because that's frivolous." Well, then what do you do? Great question. That's okay. We'll have to figure that out for later. Okay, section 6662A, accuracy related penalty. The respondent also determined that the petitioner is liable for an accuracy related penalty. I'm going to skip past this a little bit. Basically, we therefore must determine whether a 1040 was filed for the year in issue, or whether it constitutes a valid return. So, hey, sometimes you can file a return and it's not actually considered a filed return. In this case, the court concludes that it does not constitute a valid return. To determine whether a return is valid for purposes of imposing section 6662A, accuracy related penalty, we follow the test enunciated in Beard v. Commissioner, or Beard versus Commissioner, 82 TC 766-777, 1984. We're going all the way back to 1984, back in our time machine. Beard versus Commissioner. To be valid under Beard, first. Oh, right. I remember reading this from the summary. There's like a 4-part test. First, there must be sufficient data to calculate the tax liability. Number 1. Second, the document must purport to be a return. Okay. Third, there must be an honest and reasonable attempt to satisfy the requirements of the tax law. And fourth, the taxpayer must execute the return under penalties of perjury. I think I've heard in the past, by the way, that like you theoretically could file your own forms, because the forms are not written in statute. That's just what the IRS puts together almost for the convenience of the IRS and the taxpayer. But there is, I believe, room to say that as long as you follow these 4 things, number 1, sufficient data to calculate the tax liability. The document has to say, I'm a tax return. It has to be honest and reasonable attempt to satisfy the requirements of the tax law, and has to be executed. You have to execute the return under penalties of perjury. As long as you do those 4 things. Now, I don't recommend using a non-tax form. That's a bad idea for a million different reasons. But either way, there are times where that argument may be helpful. Petitioner's Form 1040 satisfies neither the first nor the third criteria. That's what I was thinking, because the second one, the second was the document must purport to be a return. He did file a 1040 from what we understand. And then the fourth one was it was under perjury. So anytime you sign a tax return, I believe that's what it's going to be. Does it say that on the Form 1040? Does it say here? Let's look up Form 1040. Let's look up the word perjury. Perjury. Yeah, hey. Okay, so take a look at Form 1040. If you look, it says by the signatures under penalties of perjury. Okay, so there you go. On the Form 1040, petitioner reported zero income and federal income tax withheld of $7,844. Petitioner's return did not report any money received from any source and reflects $0 entries for income and all other lines except for the $7,844 that he reported as federal income tax withheld. He claimed a refund for this entire amount. The Form 1040 does not contain sufficient data to calculate the petitioner's tax liability because it doesn't include any sources of the reported income, or excuse me, of the reported withholding. That's what I was saying. He didn't submit a W-2. There was nothing together with that return. This court has held that a tax return containing only zeros is not a valid return because it does not contain sufficient information for the commissioner to calculate and assess a tax liability. Okay, there you go. Yeah, basically zero return does not constitute an honest and reasonable attempt to supply the information. Okay. Further, petitioner's filing of a zero return and failure to report his wages despite Frontier issuing him an amended Form W-2 that reported wages of $102,533 was not an honest and reasonable attempt to satisfy the requirements of the tax law. And it brings up another tax court case holding that a taxpayer's zero return did not contain sufficient data to calculate the tax liability and did not constitute an honest and reasonable attempt to satisfy the requirement of the tax law. Okay, We're going to skip past that because it is basically just giving relevant related documents. Okay, petitioner or court case. Petitioner's Form 1040 thus fails to satisfy the Beard test and is invalid. So at your next party, you can go, hey, want to learn about the Beard test? 4 parts. Yes, and go back and check it out. But basically, you have to file an actual return. Accordingly, the petitioner is not liable for the Section 6662A accuracy-related penalty determined by respondent. Interesting. Wait, so we're saying petitioner is not liable? Why are we saying he's not liable? Okay, maybe because, yeah, help me out. Put it in the comments as to why he's not liable. Okay. We only have 6 pages left. Oh my goodness. Section 6651A1, additions to tax. Okay, so we spoke about this earlier. Similar idea. Respondent bears the burden of producing sufficient evidence to show that it's appropriate to impose the additions to tax. Okay, fine. Generally, once the commissioner meets the burden of production under 7491C, the taxpayer bears the burden of proving the addition to tax does not apply. So we go back and forth. However, under Rule 142A, the commissioner bears the burden of proof in respect to any new matter. So I guess over here it's a new matter. Because respondent asserted Section 6651A addition to tax in the First Amendment to answer, and not in the notice, it's a new matter on which he bears the burden of proof. Thus, respondent bears the burden of proving the absence of reasonable cause, that there were no exculpatory factors to justify the imposition of this addition to tax. Okay, Section 6651A1 imposes an addition to tax if a taxpayer fails to timely file a required income tax return unless the taxpayer proves that such failure is due to reasonable cause and not due to willful neglect. Over here, this looks like willful neglect. The addition to tax under 6651 is 5%. We said earlier, and it goes from there, not to exceed 25%. Return is generally considered filed with the IRS when the return is delivered to and received by the IRS. That's an interesting discussion for the mailbox rule. To determine whether a taxpayer has filed a valid return for purposes of 6651, look at the Beard test. Similar idea to what we said before. Court and Beard analyze whether the taxpayer filed a valid return. Respondents satisfied the burden of proof by introducing into evidence a transcript of petitioner's zero return and petitioner's 2018 wage and income transcript showing that the Form W-2 was issued to petitioner. Okay, brings up another court case. At trial, respondent's counsel attempted to question whether petitioner as to whether he was employed by Frontier. Remember, we already went through that, and he basically just said, I don't know what you're talking about. The withholdings that he reported on Form 1040, the facts of the previous tax court case, which was similar to this case, whether he knew what Frontier was and how he earned a living. Again, he gave non-responsive answers. We hold that the respondent has satisfied the burden of proof, and therefore it looks like that those penalties are going to stick. The evidence before us that the petitioner conducts at trial, they did not act with reasonable cause and in good faith. Therefore, respondent's determination the petitioner is liable for 6651. Okay, then there's a discussion of 6673, which I think we looked up before. What is that about? I think that's related to frivolous. Let's see. In the First Amendment, respondent asserts that the sanctions is appropriate because the petitioner instituted this proceeding primarily for delay. Oh, right, delay. So, right, if you're just trying to do all this crazy stuff just to push things off, then there's another penalty of up to $25,000. And the court is given considerable latitude. Okay, judicial notice of petitioner's other tax court case. So then there's also a discussion of the fact that this guy also had multiple other court cases as well. And we're going to skip past that analysis. Let's hit to the end over here. After the court issued the order, on April 10th of 2024, the court issued an order to petitioner in the case offering him an opportunity to abandon his frivolous arguments. In the instant case, specifically, the status report order provided that in light of this motion to dismiss, wherein he stated that he promised not to bring any further petitions before the court and to cease any further frivolous arguments, he was directed on May 10th, 2024, to file with the court a status report of any motions he deemed appropriate, at the time regarding his views with respect to the instant case. Okay, petitioner did not respond to the status report order, despite petitioner's recantation and assurances that he would abandon frivolous arguments. Right? He sounds a little bit like he's addicted to frivolous arguments. I'm never going to do it again. He has done so only partially in this case. His activities and arguments before the court replicate those that the court has rejected in the past. We credit petitioner for heeding our warnings at the start of this trial and abandoning many of the arguments that the court had previously found frivolous. However, he persisted in his citizenship argument. We note that the trial in this case proceeded. It's interesting they never bring up of like, why can't they just prove whether or not he's a citizen? Not sure. We note that the trial in this case proceeded by the court's order denying petitioner's motion for summary judgment, where it rejected petitioner's citizenship argument as frivolous. However, after the court entered the order and decision, we issued the status report order, which was intended to prompt the petitioner to correct himself. They give this guy lots of chances. Petitioner failure to respond to the status report order is telling, and a reversal of his assurances to court. They may cease any further frivolous arguments. Okay, last page. Moreover, we see little reason why petitioner instituted this proceeding except to delay. So basically, we concluded, yes, this was just a delay. In determining the amount of this penalty, we credit petitioner for abandoning other frivolous arguments after receiving the court's warning at trial. However, we again warn petitioner that should he persist and continue to raise frivolous, groundless arguments before the court in the future, he may be subject to the full $25,000 penalty. Conclusion. This is it, folks. We hold that the petitioner is liable for the deficiency. So that's going to be the $7,833 we discussed earlier, I believe, and the section 6651A1 addition to tax, but not 6662A accuracy of the penalty. Interesting. We'll also hold that a petitioner is liable for $10,000 section 6673 penalty. We've considered all arguments made and facts presented in reaching our holdings. And to the extent not discussed above, we conclude that they are moot, irrelevant, and without merit. To reflect the foregoing, an appropriate order and decision will be entered. CC. And it even talks about it right over here. The IRS publishes and occasionally updates the truth about frivolous tax arguments. Whenever you see these like different things on social media, likely the IRS has already discussed it. So in conclusion, don't make frivolous arguments. Don't pretend like you know what you're talking about when you don't. Get a lawyer or just pay your taxes and be done. If you have any further questions, please put them in the comments. We'd love to keep up this discussion, and I hope my review of this tax court case could help you on your journey to learning more about tax law and making sure you are following the law. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and looking forward to seeing everyone in future videos.